Hey, gang, this week's episode is brought to you by oldschoolshirts.com. Hey, check them out. You like defunct teams and leagues and t-shirt form? Well, you'll find them there, but a whole bunch of other stuff, too. Do you remember a radio station of the past or perhaps a mall that you used to go to? All kinds of great cultural and sports memories can be found at the great folks at oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code GOODSEATS for 10% off all of your purchases. And now, here's our show.
There was, in the years after World War II, it was a time when we built the domes, the museum, the zoo, but if there's one iconic building from that period, it's County Stadium. There was a feeling that you were not a big league town unless you had a big league team, and it stuck in our craw. The arrival of the Braves in '53, hysteria is not an exaggeration. There was just a feeling that we had arrived, and finally we're kind of in the ranks of the bigs. Then our hearts were broken when they left. The Brewers were not yet here, the Braves were gone. Pretty nice to have the Bucks come. That was nice to be back in the bigs.
I think when the NBA made it known that they were searching for expansion teams, Wes Pavlon and Marv Fishman jumped right on it.
You know, Marv Fishman was a very successful real estate man. And then Wes Pavlon was like no human being I've ever known.
They were very respectful, and they got to know us. We were all one. Players, management, ownership, we were all one. We were the Milwaukee Bucks.
Basketball is a niche sport. I'm not sure what the mentality would be, but it's not quite as universal as baseball or perhaps football.
Even though it took a while for our fans to learn who we were, the players. That first year, I think we averaged 6,200 people at the old arena, but they were embracing.
Fans love their sports in Wisconsin, and just the fan response was just terrific. You know, when we played our first game there, I just remember, I can't remember if the arena was completely sold out, but it was a good crowd.
And then the second year, everything changed so much from the first. Even though they got their feet wet as an organization, you get Kareem. Well, that changes everything. We went from 27 wins as an expansion team, which was great, to 52 wins with Kareem with the same team. Everything changed then because the spotlight was suddenly on our franchise.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Hey, how you doing? It's Tim Hanlon. It's Good Seats Still Available. Yeah, it's the curious little podcast that's devoted to what used to be in professional sports. How are you? How was your 4th of July extended weekend? Hopefully safe and not too many hot dogs, and hopefully all your fingers and toes are still attached where they're supposed to be. And you are supposed to be right here. Thank you for finding us, as always, and telling your friends and so on, for our little sojourn into some little aspect of forgotten sports, things that don't exist anymore, or we even like to get into origin stories, and that's kind of the focus this week. We're going to talk about the early days and the pre-early days before this franchise even existed in the NBA, the Milwaukee Bucks, who tend to be a pretty competitive squad, especially over the last decade or so, with Giannis at the helm and obviously winning a major championship for Milwaukee, their first in a long, long time in the 2020/2021 season, where they won the finals after a number of years with Giannis sort of as the centerpiece. But as we'll hear in our conversation this week with Jordan Treske, the Bucks' first championship was a mere 3 years or 3 seasons after their birth in 1968. They actually won the finals in 1970-71 under the auspices of then coach Larry Costello, who was with them since the very beginning, and a young buck, literally and figuratively, by the name of Kareem Abdul Jabbar. He was known as Lew Alcindor then, of course, and a wily veteran that year as well by the name of Oscar Robertson, and a legendary team, a legendary performance, some great players, memorable all around, and quite a story that people I think sort of forget, especially of a current generation of fans in the NBA and the Bucks in particular, that this was a team that didn't exist in 1967, and yet here they were 3 years later winning it all, which, by today's standards seems to be kind of no big deal because you can throw money at a lot of things, but this was a huge deal, and kind of almost unheard of, especially when you hear the story of its origin. And you hear a little bit there from a clip from 2021, I think, in celebration of the memory of that first ever championship. It was done by the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, the newspaper / local media company now. It's called 1968, The Birth of the Milwaukee Bucks. And you heard a couple of names that will pop up in this conversation with Jordan and me in a few seconds. Wayne Embry, coach, administrator, a guy of real import in the story. John McLaughlin, who was also a key part, a cog of the early Milwaukee Bucks history. And then historian John Gerda also is in that clip there. But you hear kind of sort of the origin story. And oddly, it kind of it centers around not basketball, but baseball and the abandonment of Milwaukee by the Braves, who came with great fanfare in the 1950s and perhaps signaled a westward expansion of baseball when Boston moved to Milwaukee, but then found even greener pastures in Atlanta in the mid to late 1960s. And then again, all of a sudden, Milwaukee was bereft of a quote unquote major league sports franchise. And we talked about for many, many different episodes from many different angles. There are a lot of cities, especially in the 1960s, maybe even earlier than that, looked at a big four league professional sports franchise as their ticket to true quote unquote major league status as a city or metropolitan area. So you can imagine the fans of the Milwaukee Braves, people in Milwaukee, Wisconsin proper, frankly, aside from the Green Bay Packers, obviously, which, is a regional power in the NFL and played a couple of games each season, at least one, in Milwaukee to kind of keep that market kind of safe, if you will, Milwaukee. Milwaukee still had sort of a complex about itself being a major league city. And as we'll hear in our conversation with Jordan, a guy named Marv Fishman to the rescue. And you'll understand why Marv Fishman was such a crucial figure in Milwaukee citizenry, as well as his vision for getting a sports franchise anew for Milwaukee, becoming, as we'll hear, the Bucks, and a very interesting, colorful number of years with this franchise. And they're making news now as we record this. It's been a heck of a week in the Milwaukee Bucks franchise, because you may have heard that they literally are dumping Damian Lillard, future Hall of Famer for sure, and his big $110 million contract for the next 2 years, and are betting the farm, if you will, and hopefully support Giannis in his later years, perhaps for one last shot at a championship. With Miles Turner, he himself a major figure in the Indiana Pacers' success this year, getting to the finals of the NBA summit, not winning it all, but pretty darn close. So a lot of moves that have been made, and a lot of head scratching, frankly. Brook Lopez is basically out of the mix now too, but it looks like the rest of the team now will still be in play. I think only one can assume that this is a one sort of last shot in the next couple of years to get Giannis and the rest of his teammates one new and final championship for the Bucks franchise. We'll see. It's a pretty dramatic set of moves, given how relatively strong and stable and playoff ready that the Bucks have been over the last number of years. But we shall see. But the story of the early creation of this team is no less dramatic. And the book that Jordan has coming out later this week, July 7th, just I think a day or so away from when we drop this episode on Well, we're dropping this episode on July 7th, which is today. There you go. So as you listen to this episode, whether it's today or the days ahead, it is available now. It is called Building the Milwaukee Bucks. Kareem Abdul Jabbar, Oscar Robertson, and the rapid rise of an NBA franchise. And it is available wherever good books are found. It is published by our friends at McFarland. And of course, if you'd like to give us a couple of shekels of referral love and help us keep our lights on and the heat or the air conditioning going, depending on what season you're talking about, we would love you to go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode 402 with me and Jordan Treske, and you'll find a convenient link to the paperback or Kindle versions of said book, and Amazon will get it to you as quickly as humanly possible. All right, let's not waste any more time. Let's get into the chat. Really interesting stuff. I learned quite a bit. Let's learn about these early years of the Milwaukee Bucks. What got Milwaukee into the NBA game in the first place? So let's talk about some baseball too. That kind of got us into this mix. Here's the conversation that Jordan and I had a couple of weeks back. Please sit back and, as always, enjoy. How about some background on you and why the Bucks story called you out, if you will, to write this book?
It's a very good question. The start of it really goes back to like 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago. I started writing about the Bucks when, to kind of date myself, at least, of like the excitement, newfound excitement around the Bucks at the time. It was Jason Kidd's first year. Jabari Parker was a very highly thought of draft pick at the time. Giannis Antetokounmpo, we obviously know him as like two-time MVP, NBA World Champion now. He was still very raw and skinny, but you could sense that there was something about him that was special. And so I had gotten back into watching the Bucks after being a fan, growing up, and a fan of all kind of the Milwaukee and Wisconsin sports teams, so your Packers, your Brewers, and Bucks.
I'm assuming that's because you're a native or grew up there or spent some time there or still are there.
Yes, I'm a native. I grew up like 20 minutes north of Milwaukee, and I've since lived in Milwaukee for the last like 5 years proper. So it's kind of just in my blood more than anything. And so, and obviously it kind of lines up where you have a team to follow every sports season between football, the major. It's the picture's growing a lot more now, but like when I was growing up, the big three were obviously football, basketball, baseball. So it kind of would naturally line up where, it's a team season's ending, another one begins, kind of thing. So I have always liked sports and played sports, but really I liked writing. I liked going through sports cards, like going through stats and all that stuff. And then kind of blossomed to when I was, getting back into the Bucks around that time, as I mentioned. I just felt this need to like write about them. I had a lot of time on my hands. I was like, this feels like the perfect gateway to do it. So I started blogging about them at Fansided's Milwaukee Bucks page, which is called Behind the Buck Paths. And it was just really fun. And over the course of my time there, I found really, when the Bucks season was over, you had a lot of time to kill and you had a lot of pieces to fill. And you look at these off-season dates and you're just like, okay, there's a lot of openness that you like, what am I going to write about today? What am I going to write about this? And naturally you kind of look at the Bucks history, and that would fill in a lot of off-season content for us. I'm going to shout out my good friend Adam McGee here, who would run the site, and he was kind of the guy that was looking for all these staff writers to help, build up the site. And we both were really keen in on, the history of the Bucks, and we knew these parts of the story, but you'd write one piece about 500 to 750 words or whatever it was about Kareem or about this or about that, and it would be like kind of piecemeal. But there's always something that always would draw me into looking back and wanting to explore more about their history that wasn't just filling up content for that for that day. That's kind of the impetus of looking back at the team's history specifically.
So, where did you kind of sort of start your journey right on this? Because I mean, I think it's interesting. We think about the Bucks, right? I mean, they've been around for what, 59 years, I think, or something like that. Um, but they also kind of they came into being at a time in the late 60s when Milwaukee was and then wasn't and then was again and then wasn't again, kind of a major league city, so to speak, when it came to pro sports, right? And I think some of the genesis of an NBA franchise coming into to Milwaukee actually kind of emanated out of some of the pro sports exploits, in particular the Braves, which had left to Milwaukee for greener pastures, right?
Yes. So that was to kind of, I'll kind of like weave in like how like my process of it, but also obviously tell that story because that's what really drew me into all of this. And that I could tell like when I was, you know, researching pieces, I was going through newspaper clippings. I would go to the Milwaukee Public Library, which has the home of both the Milwaukee Journal and the Milwaukee Sentinel pre those papers merging together. So they would have, you know, a bunch of history of obviously on the Bucks, on the Braves, on the Milwaukee Hawks, which obviously was the first NBA team in Milwaukee that did not do so well. um, and I would just pour through these pages and clippings, and you're just kind of like seeing when the Bucks were the idea of the Bucks, but even before they were even called the Bucks, everything was stemmed from how I'm forgetting misplacing the word, but just how traumatic the Braves had left Milwaukee and kind of the void that it left the city in a very precarious time because you know I growing up here and you understand that like sports carries a special meaning. Maybe it's because of the Packers itself, because it is this community owned team, and that's so baked into the story of the Packers that as you grow older, you realize like that is so unique to the Packers. So when any other team in the States and Milwaukee is kind of in that shadow, you know, if it births a Braves, if it births a Bucks, if it births a Brewers, the Packers, that shadow extends down here and it's a lot harder for them to kind of crack through that what was you know kind of this impenetrable wall of like the Packers just mean so much to that city of Green Bay and that community, but it permeates all throughout Wisconsin that everything else kind of pales in comparison until the Braves came along. And it was kind of this like it captured I know there are better people more well spoken and have written a lot of Braves books about it. And I read a lot of them in the lead up to like writing this own book. And that was kind of the draw that drew me into like, this is how it was before the Bucks were even, you know, a thought. And you saw like how they captured the city's imagination, the attention. Obviously, winning a World Series is going to help that. But it went more towards when they came from Boston to Milwaukee, it really legitimized the city in a way that they never felt in that way because, you know, everything else was minor league at the time. It was even when the Hawks came to Milwaukee, NBA basketball was not nearly what it is today. So that was, they were trying to attain major league status, but the Hawks weren't going to give them that sell or give that to them. It was, you know, it took Major League Baseball and the Braves to come to Milwaukee to really fully legitimize Milwaukee in the sense of their sporting pride and that civic pride that when they left 12 years later, it really just was, it was kind of not alarming, but it was crazy how much that would, it left a stain on how the Milwaukee citizens and how dignitaries, the mayor and how it really stuck in their craw. And I think that was such an interesting backdrop with which how the Bucks were born.
Yeah, look, I think the Braves. It was I probably think Milwaukee would have labeled it an abandonment, right? I mean, it had been such a sensation coming from Boston and a rejuvenation of that franchise and Henry Aaron, all that stuff, right? And then to go to Atlanta, which was seemingly more booming. It's the South was sort of becoming more of a mecca for, especially Atlanta but it's the same issue, right? It's these are metropolitan areas, cities, especially in the late 60s, right? Where um, I think it was sort of a revelation or discovery by a lot of these professional leagues for various reasons, as we've discovered in our conversations earlier, about expansion and the growing these leagues and the NHL, for God's sakes, going from 6 teams right in 1967 to doubling their size. I mean, people forget that around that time there weren't 32 teams in the NHL or 30 soccer franchises or all that kind of stuff, right? So, but tell me about this guy Marvin Fishman, because it seems to me like this is a guy in and around Milwaukee's I guess you say business class, that I it kind of was indicative of sort of the pride, I guess, that was within the community about, hey, maybe we're not done yet when it comes to sports. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly in my reading here, his first attempt was to kind of actually get a pro football franchise in this thing called the American Football League, the AFL. But it sounds to me like your Packers thing was almost a non-starter for that. Some background there. Why would he even think football could actually be a thing given the Packers' shadow over Milwaukee and the whole state?
I think that was the big question that a lot of people that, skeptics at the time were openly wondering. Why would someone bring an AFL team to Milwaukee knowing that the Packers loom large? And the biggest thing was the Packers shared Milwaukee in their territory. So they play out of how many home games they had. I think at that time it was the 14-game schedule. So 7 home games, 3 of them would be in Milwaukee every year. And Milwaukee was so vital to the Packers territory that, before Lambeau Field, what we think of, it was the first football specific stadium built for the NFL. Long before that was built, Milwaukee County Stadium was built. That obviously drew the Braves. But it was also thought of as, hey, maybe we can kind of peel the Packers out of Green Bay and bring them to Milwaukee, because, teams around the league, specifically like, the Bears or like the Lions, kind of their Packers rivals, would look at what they're making when they're playing Milwaukee versus what they're making at City Stadium in Green Bay. And naturally they're just like, we make more money here. Let's try to be one of those Milwaukee games. And that kind of served the impetus for Green Bay to step up and be like, the Cantons of the world, the whatever kind of mid-tier cities that were being left behind in pro football. Green Bay was looking at that as like, that could be us. Like, we could easily be extinct if we don't keep what's our own. So they kind of have this huge referendum to build Lambeau Field that passes, I forget what the statistics were, but it passes pretty overwhelmingly. But they still wanted the piece of Milwaukee because they knew how vital it was to have that fan base and maintain the Packers as a statewide team, knowing that, Green Bay at the time, I can imagine it's a little bit bigger now, but it's not one of the biggest. It's not one of the top 3 biggest cities in the state, which makes it even crazier how unique the Packers story is.
Well, no, and they also there was I might have been in the 60s, but certainly I remember growing up in the 70s and 80s, right, where there was at least one, if not 2, Milwaukee games that they would play, right? And I'm sure my suspicion is that maybe some of this stuff that we're going to be getting into a little more about the AFL and or the NBA franchise that ultimately resulted maybe had something to do with it, or am I projecting there?
No, you're absolutely correct. Like they had a lease with County Stadium, and because the Packers, grew into being this dynasty over the 60s, and Vince Lombardi had not just the capital as, the most well-known man and successful man in football, but he carried such weight in how things got done in Green Bay and how things got done in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, because the Packers' success was so overwhelming that it's going to obviously affect how the image of the state is going to be presented. So he really carried home how much the Packers wanted County Stadium to be only occupied by themselves, which made it a lot harder for Marvin Fishman to create an AFL team. And he faced a lot of, I think what's unique to the story too is, like, as we'll get into various features of it, you see the opposition from even within the state, within the city, of trying to even get a team off the ground, whether that's a football team or eventually a basketball team or whatever it was. Marvin Fishman faced a lot of opposition and skepticism from his own community, from Milwaukee itself, to be like, why would you dare challenge the Packers? And he saw it as a way as, these things can coexist. And there was no way that was going to happen with the interest of the Packers and the interest of County Stadium, honestly.
Yeah, and the Milwaukee thing with the Packers actually, I think, dated back all the way to the 30s, where they were kind of irregularly, and then ultimately regularly playing at least a game at County Stadium, for that matter, since the 50s. I think it was through the mid 90s actually that dynamic sort of occurred. But I guess the interesting thing there is that, and I think this also pivots easily into the basketball side of things, is that and we'll talk about Fishman, but also want to talk about this guy, Wesley. Is it Pavillon or Pavillon?
Pavillon is, yep.
Pavillon. So you can give the backstory of some of that. But while the AFL obviously was still fledgling and obviously maybe a bit more of a raw issue, I guess, given the Packers, and obviously the Packers in the 60s were a fairly dominant team. They were obviously in those first early, don't call them Super Bowls and all that kind of stuff. But it's interesting, though, that the pivot to basketball, maybe a little background on that, because, and I guess I'll season it with this. The late 60s was also the time when a challenger basketball league was around called the ABA. Correct. So I'm really interested in, to the extent that was the relationship, these guys, Pavillon and Fishman, why basketball, and interestingly, maybe to the extent why the NBA versus, say, the ABA, which would seem in hindsight a little bit more easily achieved given their newness to the marketplace.
Yeah, and one would think too, the expansion fee to get in the ABA, it was, believe Marvin Fisher said it was $50,000, which compared to what they pay to get into the NBA with the Bucks, which was $2 million in 1968. That's a different price point, obviously, that would attract you. But the thing for Marvin Fishman was, he goes through this challenge of trying to bring an AFL team. He tried to bring like a continental football team once the AFL kind of fell through and the merger happened. And again, that was kind of slipping down the ladder of, is this legitimized? Like, how legit can we look at this as a viable option? And so he has this wonderful book, and it's a great source of Bucks goodness, for lack of a better word, that I found over this research, called Bucking the Odds, where he just plainly just like talks about the evolution of wanting to bring a sports franchise to Milwaukee, because once the Braves left, there was nothing. So once he got through those initial challenges, he was kind of looked at as this guy as like, hey, if you want to bring a sports team in this league, you're the guy that's going to bring it home here, right? And nothing just kind of fit the vibe until he thought about basketball. It wasn't the first choice, or football kind of reigned supreme. But once basketball got along, and he kind of found the powers that be, like the NBA commissioner Walter Kennedy at the time. The weird kind of side note to all of this is the head of expansion. His name is Ben Kerner. he was the owner of the Milwaukee Hawks, and so he obviously knew what it would be like to operate a team in Milwaukee. And the Hawks were terrible. The Hawks were terrible. They didn't even make the playoffs in their 4 years in Milwaukee when it was 8 out of 10 teams made the playoffs. Like they were just very bad. They had a brief pop once they made it to Milwaukee, but it was very, very like died out quickly. And once the Braves came along too, the Hawks were just kind of forgotten by the sporting community of Milwaukee. So
basketball not necessarily second on the list of many people's desires for a sports franchise. Maybe you're saying.
No, I think part of it is just the primitive part of that game, because we're talking about basketball before the 24-second shot clock. But it's a very kind of I don't even know what the equivalent would be today. It's just a totally foreign sport to what we now know, even back to when it evolved into the 70s and the 80s. So I think the product itself just kind of it took a long time for basketball to kind of find itself in Milwaukee. And really a lot of that comes down to Marquette and their success with under Al McGuire to kind of bring eyes and kind of diehards to Milwaukee to really view basketball as a sport to be and kind of get that attention from it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so that's interesting and not unimportant actually, right? Because Marquette obviously was becoming quite the power, and the idea of translating some of that collegiate interest and success, and as we've explored in previous teams and leagues and stuff, the idea, I guess, perhaps, or the notion that there might be a local pipeline that some of the standout players there might be able to be coaxed or drafted into or traded for this fledgling new team and keep them home, so to speak, and continue their name recognition in a pro franchise in Milwaukee.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's kind of I talk about it in the book somewhat in very specific instances, but without that happening, I don't think basketball comes around and looks at Milwaukee the same way, with Marquette kind of establishing the sport itself as a good kind of spectator sport, if that makes sense. And then obviously once the Braves leave, Milwaukee's empty. The Packers are this kind of half team, if you want to call it, but Marvin Fishman's whole thing with the Packers is that they're called the Green Bay Packers. They're not the Milwaukee Packers. So that was kind of the impetus for everything that he wanted to do, was just to bring a team to Milwaukee that had Milwaukee on its jersey, had Milwaukee on the scoreboard. So part of that civic pride, eventually, I think, even if basketball wasn't the first choice, he saw it as a process that was a lot more welcoming. The NBA was in a cycle of expansion, as I mentioned. Ben Kerner himself, the head of expansion, despite all the struggles that he may have gone through, he always viewed Milwaukee as a city that could embrace the sport. And it was kind of this, a lot of confluence of trial and error, and maybe a perfect storm, if you will, of all these circumstances falling in line, where all the fighting and challenges that he faced bringing or trying to think of a football team in the AFL or just a pro football franchise in whatever league it was. There weren't as many obstacles bringing that to the NBA. And I know you mentioned before with the ABA, there was the big thing that, despite the price point of going into the ABA, the challenges of trying to bring an AFL franchise to Milwaukee, I think, led Fishman to be like, I don't want to go through this route, hoping that Milwaukee could survive a merger, because everybody kind of knew what the ABA was aiming for, seeing how well it worked for pro football and those two leagues merging. He wanted to be in the top flight league, and that was the NBA at the time.
All right, take me to 1967 and tell me this relationship between Messrs. Fishman and Wesley Pavillon, because they're both kind of self-made local business guys, right, with some coin. But I'm guessing Pavillon had a bit more on his balance sheet and was kind of more crucial. I think it feels to me like Fishman was more kind of the guy, the front guy, and Wesley Pavillon was more the guy with the money, maybe a little bit more behind the scenes. But it seems like they both needed each other kind of to make this seemingly wild pitch to the NBA that Milwaukee should be a franchise expansion candidate.
Yes, you'd be correct. I kind of, how I look at the book is it's kind of, you see these narratives or you see how people kind of drive the ball forward in various ways. So Marvin Fishman's kind of the civic pride guy that he wants to bring a football, or, no, I shouldn't say football team. It was once a football team, but he wants to bring a franchise to Milwaukee that is near and dear to him. He's, as you mentioned, he's a businessman. He's, owns like what realty companies and real estate. His business is based in real estate, but he knows that he doesn't necessarily have the capital to kind of, once you get the operation up and running, paying for players, getting the finances in order, like making sure that this is not just going to flop on, after 1 or 2 years. He knows that he kind of has to look for a money man. And now this brings us to Wesley Pavillon, who's kind of like, I can even remember when we find these things in like Sports Illustrated. There's a wonderful Sports Illustrated profile of him in like February of 1969. So it's the first year, the expansion year for the Bucks. And he's kind of this rags to riches guy in a very Mark Twain-esque way. And the stories that you read or that he would tell and print and all this stuff, it's like, did this actually happen? Like, you don't, like, it's very like tall tale vibes that come with him, but his whole business acumen comes from very street smart guy, very, self-minded, or had good self-will to kind of just make himself out of nothing. And he builds this kind of, it starts out as this not cable TV, but TV service empire called Milwaukee School of Television Services. He kind of talks his way into eventually owning the whole operation in like short order. Comes to Milwaukee in the 50s, and eventually this blossomed into this kind of business called Career Academy, and it was built with kind of any field of work. They help train anybody, whether it was like becoming like a dental hygienist, whether it was becoming like, like as a television operator, whatever it was. It was kind of this occupational school. This idea kind of really kicks up off the ground, and they're expanding into different states, expanding across the country. They put it on Wall Street up for stock. Like Wesley Pavillon's quickly becoming like a person of note within the Milwaukee and Wisconsin area. And that naturally attracted Marvin Fishman, who through shared kind of friends and architects, they both had the same architect for their office. They kind of had this kismet way of coming together. And Wesley Pavillon is, he wanted to break into sports. He wanted to kind of have this sports empire and viewed Milwaukee as the perfect city to kind of build it. And yeah, he's definitely, I would view him as kind of the money man, the guy that starts to, once the Bucks come into being, he's kind of his official title was chairman of the board of the board of the directors that they had. So he's kind of the money man in a lot of ways.
How do they succeed? And they also came aboard with another franchise too. How were they chosen? I mean, honestly, whether was Phoenix and Milwaukee the only two raising their hands and pursuing this, or were there others in contention as well, from what you could tell?
There are a lot of other cities. I'm forgetting what other ones were in contention, but Milwaukee for some reason just kind of had the momentum on their side. They had a partnership with the Bulls during the 1967-68 season, where they had a couple um, neutral site or games played at the Milwaukee Arena, which was the place that the Milwaukee Hawks played, and obviously the stadium that the Bucks would eventually play in once they were came into the league. But these preseason, or one was a preseason game, one was held on Thanksgiving of 1967, and then one was in February, a couple weeks after the Bucks were, or Milwaukee was an expansion team, and it was successful. Granted, it's the Celtics playing the Bulls, it's the Knicks playing the Bulls, so two of the top franchises at the league at the time come to Milwaukee. It's naturally going to get the attention of neutral observers, but those were well enough to kind of turn the tide in a lot of ways of forcing the league to look at Milwaukee as a good option to turn to when they're looking at the next round of expansion. And the irony of all this is that it's not necessarily Marvin Fishman's doing. It's Herb Kohl, who's kind of he's the son of the Kohl department store kind of family, and Kohl's as the clothing brand too is like this big family magnet that, again, another rags to riches story that eventually becomes one of the biggest surnames of Wisconsin, quite literally. And he is best friends with Bud Selig. Bud Selig at the time is trying to bring Major League Baseball back to Milwaukee. He's trying to get through expansion. There's a lot of loggerheads there because of all the ill will kind of generated from the Braves departure, and how Major League Baseball was looking at the city and the state because of them trying to challenge their antitrust suit. But through Milwaukee Brewers Baseball Club Incorporated, Herb Kohl was kind of the one looking at expansion through basketball, both through the NBA and the ABA, and looking at they were hosting soccer games at County Stadium. It's kind of this whole big conglomerate of Milwaukee businessmen and influential business leaders that wanted to kind of look at explore every opportunity to fill County Stadium, to bring some sort of legitimacy to the sporting scene again. And through those preseason games, or I keep saying preseason games, but through those kind of neutral site games at Milwaukee Arena, Herb Kohl has the lead baton to, if he wants an NBA franchise, he can have had it. He had the same arrangement with the ABA, and they kind of backed out right as they're finalizing their 12 markets. So that's why I believe in the ABA's first season, that's why they have 11 teams, because Milwaukee is supposed to be the 12th one, and Herb Kohl kind of nixed it for reasons kind of that we'll get into with the NBA, because he had filed an application for a franchise, gets further down the road, and it's this kind of scene that's really well written and bucking the odds. This great book by Marvin Fishman, where he discovers through the paper that Herb Kohl is seeking an NBA bid, and he's just crestfallen. It's almost debilitating, because he's kind of replaying this process of is this the next obstacle that I have to go through, or am I just going to kind of let him take the reins with the NBA and be, it's not me bringing a team to Milwaukee, but someone else's. So Marvin Fishman's more than willing to kind of take a back seat to Herb Kohl in this way. And through, whether it was, it's not yet, it wasn't known how he kind of gathered this information, whether it was through the league circles or whatever, but Marvin Fishman learns that Herb Kohl kind of steps aside. For whatever reason, he doesn't agree to what the line from Marvin Fishman as in his book was. Herb Kohl wanted kind of preference in the expansion draft order and the college draft order, meaning that presumably he wants top picks in both, which is not how the NBA kind of established the expansion cycle with all these teams that are coming into the league. So it's kind of all this. It's all these things that happen very fast of one another, and leads to the birth of the Bucks in a lot of ways where it looks like it was going to be Herb Cole kind of in the lead, and he backs out for his own reasons, and Marvin Fishman and Wesley Pavlon, as they join forces together in their bid, apply for the franchise, and a couple weeks later, Milwaukee's along with Phoenix announces the next two expansion teams going into the 1968-1969 season.
All right, what's this? Oldschoolshirts.com. Fantastic. You've heard me talk on and on and on about the great folks and the great wares at oldschoolshirts.com. Like the name implies, it's old school and it's shirts, and they put them together, see, into what they call oldschoolshirts.com. It's like the name implies, but of course, we love them primarily for their sportswear. You name the league of the past, you name the team of the past, the chances are huge that they're going to have more than one shirt and different color schemes for things that you may remember from the United Football League or the Major Indoor Soccer League or various flavors of the original XFLs, plural, or the Federal League perhaps, or maybe World Team Tennis, or maybe it was the North American Soccer League, and on and on and on. But hey, it's not just sports. It's also great cultural touchstones and memories from the past. How about the officially licensed Evel Knievel connection? How about collection? Yeah, that's what he's trying to say. Various colleges. How about dead malls of the past? Ice cream parlors, maybe even radio stations that you might remember. Hey, even there's a latest edition of the now old, Aloha Stadium commemorative shirt. All that kind of stuff and more. You will find at least a handful of shirts that you will just transport you back into your past, and you will amaze and impress your friends at the same time. It's oldschoolshirts.com, and we got a promo code for you, of course. Let's save you some dough while you go there, and its promo code is Good Seats. Good Seats. That's the promo code at oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code Good Seats for 10% off all of your purchases. Hey, P.F. Wilson and your friends at oldschoolshirts.com, thank you for your sponsorship of the show. And now, back to our conversation. It's pretty interesting, too, because I have to think that the Bulls weren't not necessarily eager to have a team so close in geography joining the league, or were they to have a, if you will, natural rival? It feels to me like those exhibition games were maybe more of a flex to kind of incorporate Milwaukee kind of into the Chicago Bulls marketing territory. I don't know, but that's maybe I'm looking at them from a modern lens to that.
I think that is the case because, as you know, we're talking about the time where NBA teams, much like the MLB at the around that time, because I know this is a big thing with the Braves, is that they're looking at television as this is eating into what we make at the at the ticket gates. So at the time, or how we look at it now, it would be like, yeah, that's a television audience and television market that Milwaukee would easily eat into for the Bulls. And, during the Michael Jordan days, that definitely did not matter because the Bulls reigned supreme around here in the 90s and stuff like that. But at the time, the owner of the Bulls, his name is Dick Klein, he was more than willing to, he wanted to have that rivalry. He wanted to have this kind of, this close-knit team where, kind of engender goodwill with one of both teams and franchises as the league was expanding, which made it even more. It very much paralleled when the Hawks were brought from the Tri-Cities. So it was like Moline, Illinois, Davenport, Iowa, Rock Island, Illinois. These very small cities, and the Minneapolis Lakers, they wanted a closer team because they're the furthest west team at the time, and they wanted a team in Milwaukee to kind of pair off of one another in kind of ease up on traveling bills, I'm guessing at the time.
Well, that I would also imagine too, and maybe at least in the early going, a team that they could be in the same division with and
Hmm.
probably kick their butts on a regular basis because they're new and an expansion franchise. Which leads me into the 1968 season. So, can you just characterize, briefly what sort of that first year was like? Because obviously it sets the stage for what was transformational the next season, but I think people lose perspective just how um, woeful and probably expectedly so the first season was in 68.
Yes, it's very interesting because I think a lot of the writing around the time was about acceptance with a new NBA team coming to Milwaukee. It wasn't we the Hawks played from 1951 to 1955. It's still kind of in the recent memory, even though there's a lot of Milwaukee citizens and new Bucks fans were maybe watching Hawks games at that time or going to Hawks games. It was still kind of fresh enough to be like, okay, let's see how this kind of thing goes. And it was always the intent of Marvin Fishman and Wesley Pavilon to kind of play the slow game. They knew the first year was going to be really hard, and they looked at going back to the Marquette connection here. They looked at Al McGuire, who was seeking kind of a challenge to jump to the NBA, and he saw and would have been paid handsomely at the time. He saw what could come of that if he wanted to join the Bucks and be their first first coach in franchise history, and that really kind of set them off on a very dangerous note. I know Marvin Fisher wrote as much as look at as all these Marquette fans are looking at us trying to steal away their coach, and we're trying to sell tickets to them, and that could be dangerous for their whole business model. And to look at it at Milwaukee accepting them because those are the fans that they're catering to. That's how they're trying to build this whole thing up. So that falls through. They look at a lot of options of current coaches at the time, but there was always one guy that they kept hearing about, and his name was Larry Costello. He had just retired from the 76ers at the end of the 1968 season, played 13 years, a very old school guy, kind of his time, which is very interesting as the whole society of the late 60s and amid the civil rights era and Vietnam. Like he's just kind of has this 50s outlook about him. He's got a crew cut. He looks like he just came off an army base. He's just very old school, diligent, disciplined. And in a lot of ways, that was exactly what the Bucks needed to get off the ground. They knew that they're going to take a lot of lumps at the time. Like, it's hard to kind of think back to expansion era for the NBA because in the modern sense, the last expansion team was the Charlotte Bobcats more than 20 years ago. But at this time, there's a class of players that are always kind of shaking and going from team to team because they get picked to this expansion team. They may not necessarily find their footing there, and then they're exposed to the next expansion cycle. So you have to think of these cast-offs that come to the city, and it's all new to them. They're moving around. It's very nomadic. And a guy like Larry Costello, who's like, I'm expecting this great scene and kind of story from Wayne Embry in his book called The Inside Game. He kind of explained just how Larry Costello, just from the jump, was expecting the guys to know the playbook from the moment that they walked into training camp, to know NBA history at the time, to know all these things, and would really put them to work them really hard. It's going to come with their lumps and stuff like that, but they know that there's a bigger picture of coming together and building a team that, as we get into, like, it's built with one thing in mind or one person in mind throughout that first year. But the first year, by the end of it, the Bucks were kind of finding their way. They weren't, they finished the year 27-55, but in terms of attendance, they're doing respectable. They're playing games in a couple games like Green Bay and Madison to kind of generate goodwill across the state. But from as much as they were last in their conference, they saw the bigger gains to be had in terms of getting people to the games and trying to sell the Bucks and basketball in a better way than the Hawks did it when they could.
Well, it's also an expansion franchise like it was meant to be, which is usually to be a laughing stock. You want to build something and it just not automatically, not unlike today, or is it? Because 1969. So let's talk about this. The drama, right? I think this is probably after that first season, right? Did they tank? Who knows? But I doubt it. I don't think they had to go too far out of their way.
I would say they did.
Okay. Well, okay. But I mean, there had to be some earnestness to the process, right? They wanted the new fans, new whatever, right? And finishing what, 27-55, right? Okay. So at that time, right, the NBA, I guess, had the two least successful teams engage in a coin flip, or was it because there was a tie in woefulness that season?
It was a coin flip. This is during the coin flip era.
Okay, so is that so remind me or enlighten me, is that the two worst teams, or was this only in the case of, say, a tie of some sort?
It would be the worst team in each conference.
Got it. That's it.
Yes.
Okay, I knew that was it. Okay, so set the tone then. Set the tone for this coin flip. Obviously, Milwaukee had the worst record in the Eastern Conference at the time. Who were they competing with for this coin flip, and how did it go?
They were competing with the Phoenix Suns, so obviously the other team that
they're expansion mates. Yeah.
And this is the coin flip built around now Kareem Abdul Jabbar, but at the time Lew Alcindor. And again, interjecting, the process of finding these things. It was downright shocking. I shouldn't have been shocked knowing what I know now, but I'm going through these clippings, and it's 2 days after Milwaukee comes back to the NBA, and they're talking about getting Lew Alcindor and what that means for the franchise. And it was kind of this open secret that Fishman Pavlon, that the reason why they joined the NBA when they did was they were looking at that draft and looking at Lew Alcindor, and
he was a generational talent, right? And
yes,
so the salivation was going on in the both pro leagues, right? Even before this coin flip was even happening.
Yes, and I think this is where, like, as much as it is the story is of its time, the legend of Kareem, kind of it doesn't rival to what we see with kind of high schoolers or mixtapes on YouTube of 6-year-olds that kind of dominating the game, but he was permeating through this national consciousness. People knew who he was when he's appearing on Ed Sullivan in the mid 60s as a teenager. He's not even at UCLA. He's just playing in high school basketball in New York. So he's, this is before the one and done era. This is before early entry in the draft. So he has to ride it out in college. And so all these teams are looking at 1969, draft as this is when we could get Lew Alcindor to our city, to fully legitimize our team. And as you mentioned, it's not just the Bucks are not just battling the Suns in this way. They're battling the ABA because they're looking at him as, hey, we're trying to kind of eat into the NBA's pie. What better way to do that than get Lew Alcindor to our team, or to our league rather? And that was the big rivalry, really, like, at the season of suspense between the NBA teams of who's going to finish last and who's going to go to this coin flip kind of pales to comparison of, well, who's going to outbid, who's going to, pony up the money to get Lew Alcindor to their town. So it's kind of this twofold fight that the Bucks have to get where, yes, eventually they get the coin flip and it's this crazy scenes. The New York Times has this great article by Robert Lipsyte it's called Flipping, where he details just how there's this one detail that's always stuck in my mind of the commissioner. His name is Walter Kennedy, as I mentioned before. He's flipping the coin for television. They're televising this because there's a lot of mudslinging from the ABA prior to. They're alleging that there was a secret draft and that the Bucks had won it weeks before it was actually held, and so it forces the NBA to televise this coin flip. The Bucks win the coin flip. Everybody where this was in the Bucks offices or wherever it was is hooting and hollering. Wes Pavlon's cigarette burns the ear of the Bucks general manager at the time, and they kind of say they get compose themselves enough to be like, okay, we won the pick. We'll follow you more with details. But Walter Kennedy keeps flipping the coin for I'm assuming like B-roll for television at the time, and it kept flipping tails, which was the winning side for the pick. So it's just this weird detail that just, I don't know, it's embedded in my mind. But that's the flip itself. But then right away, you turn into, it's up to where Kareem wants to play. He talked openly. He's a New York born and raised. As much as he played at UCLA and was the focal point of that dynasty with the Bruins. It's no secret where he wants to go. He wants to go back to New York. He has an affinity for the Knicks, but he's kind of openly, wanting to. I'm trying to think of the best word to say it, but he's not against kind of going with the counterculture and going against the league that's challenging the NBA with, and that was kind of putting the ABA or putting wind in the sail of the ABA of like they felt that they had a real shot to get him if they had the right bid. And Kareem very early on is this very principled person. One of the best things about this book is he's characterized as this kind of unknowable figure in a lot of the paper and clippings of the time and what's written of his time in Milwaukee. But when you read his autobiographies, he kind of, you see more about what he is in his life, and he's driven by greater kind of enlightenment, and we know now that he was really diving into Islam, and it's this very interesting point of his kind of being and coming into his own. Of he sees kind of what the future is laid out for him, and he requests one bid from each, from Milwaukee, from the ABA. And he doesn't want any, shenanigans. He doesn't want overbidding if they come in low. He just put your best offer. And the Bucks put up, I believe it was like $1.4 million, or at the time, I'm trying to.
I think that's right. For a 5-year deal, I think, right?
For a 5-year deal. And there's kind of some incentives there. And when the ABA come around, they lowball. They thought they were talking this big game, and they thought that they kind of had it in the bag. So there's some, I know in Terry Pluto's Loose Balls, there's some details in there about what they actually bid. It was really hard to find for a very long time, but it was, I'm not going to say it was negligible compared to what the Bucks put in, but it was enough for Kareem and his team to kind of look at everything and be like, is that it? Is that really what you're going to put forth to me?
Well, it was also exacerbated, I think, by the fact that and we had Dennis Murphy, now no longer with us, on our show a number of years ago.
Yeah.
And we kind of got into sort of the logic of how he and his cohorts helped stand up and start the ABA, and then later on the WHA, et cetera. And this model, right, where, like in the case of the WHA with Gordie Howe, right?
Yes.
Pooling efforts, right? Getting all the teams to kind of pony up, which was the case in here as well. Maybe the model for what the WHA did as well, right? But that's even more astonishing given the fact that he's passing the hat, if you will, to get the ABA, right? So, and it's interesting, maybe that it took that failure to kind of maybe figure out how to do it right when the WHA came around a few years later, because that signing Gordie Howe, that put the WHA on the map. That was an automatic. We got to take these guys seriously because this is the best player in the game. moving for a big check. And I guess all that was missing in this case was the big check.
Yes, and I know there are details of George Mikan was the ABA commissioner at the time, and I think part of that was they're looking at it as an image thing. But it is very interesting to kind of, the guy nicknamed Mr. Basketball, and he forced the original merger of the BAA and the NBL, at the turn of the 50s. And he's kind of in the same, or not in the same spot, but in this crucial spot of trying to negotiate or trying to force a merger between the NBA and the ABA. And he comes out on this losing side. And it's, the ABA had tried to lure like Wes Unseld the year before, Elvin Hayes when he came out for the draft, but it was being at Lew Alcindor, there was an extra, there was a weight, there was a magnitude of losing out on him that really honestly set the ABA back in terms of trying to oppose a legitimate shot at kind of usurping the NBA. And I don't know, again, it's a very interesting 1-2 punch of the things that the Bucks just had to get through to get Kareem to town. But it paints an interesting picture for kind of these forces that they, over the course of 12, 24 months, and eventually when they win the championship in 71, they have to conquer. And it's kind of like you're leading to the final boss of it all in like a video game. So it's really interesting that way.
It's phenomenal to see literally how the team transformed from this generational talent. I mean, there are many, we've gone through many cycles generationally, and then some. For a player who's, a clear standout at the collegiate level, it could be perceived as probably or potentially the franchise, the difference maker, and all of that, right? And clearly the hype was certainly around Alcindor at this time, but he really delivered the goods that next season. I mean, literally, this is a team that transformed from, last in their division to going to losing the Eastern Division Finals the second season, literally almost doubling their wins. I think actually doubling their wins to 56-26. They were 27-55 the year before, right? With the same coach, Mr. Costello, still doing his magic, so to speak. But that magic literally was Kareem, then Lew Alcindor, and then some. Maybe a little bit about that season, and then also, can you bridge into the following season, which was the season which they miraculously in their third year of life, winning it all with another key component. He also a star, but not from the collegiate level.
Yes. So the second season, rolls around. There's obviously a lot of good buzz, optimism building with Kareem coming to Milwaukee, and it was really interesting when kind of the expectations that the Bucks themselves had going into that second year. They weren't necessarily thinking championship, but they were thinking that we're going to make the playoffs and we're going to make some noise. And it turns into, they're kind of, I believe it's like the first 20 games are kind of 10-10, 11-9. And then, it turns into 1970. They just go on these winning streaks, and any kind of questions about like if Kareem would have a period of adjustment, those fall by the wayside. They quickly kind of gel as a team, and it was Kareem's the star. He's kind of the sun with everybody else kind of orbiting around him, but the kind of players that they find between the expansion draft and the college drafts, like guys like Bob Dandridge, who eventually becomes a Hall of Famer, John McLaughlin, who's this kind of franchise legend, his numbers retired by the Bucks. He really comes into his own as kind of the sharpshooting guard. Greg Smith is kind of this super duper like Iron Man. He's like 6'5", but he leaps. It's this. They find the makeup of the roster kind of grows together, and really Kareem, like, it's astonishing how, as you mentioned, like just the jumps in going from 27 wins to 56 wins, going, beating the Sixers in the first round of the playoffs to, they lose to the Knicks, and they lose kind of badly by the end of that series, but the Knicks eventually win that title, and they're kind of assert themselves as rivals. And it's the great part of all this is the story really too. If you look at it through like a larger picture, it's like the Bucks are this kind of rocket ship that just keeps ascending and ascending, and just when they lose badly in the conference finals to the Knicks, and the Knicks fans they beat the Bucks like 132-96 in Game 5. A couple minutes left in the game, they're hooting and hollering. They're singing like "Goodbye, Louie," and it's kind of the scene that really sticks in with Kareem. And it's the same night that they lose to the Knicks. And what would unequivocally be a successful season. They still progress in a very big way. The very night that the Bucks lose to the Knicks, they announced that they have traded for Oscar Robertson, which, I mean, now, like, obviously cannot happen based on CBA rules. It's just not how transaction cycles work in the league now. But it's such an interesting response of this, like, again, going back to the rocket ship analogy, it's like, just when you think we're kind of flatlining or we're kind of plateauing, they found this way to lure Oscar Robertson, who, was on the outs with, Mr. Cincinnati Royal. He's a franchise icon. He's a Cincinnati icon. Played his college ball at the University of Cincinnati. Was a territorial draft pick for the Royals, and they didn't come close to, or I shouldn't say come close to NBA Finals, but they didn't break through against, quite often the Celtics and occasionally the 76ers to get out of the East during the 60s. So he's very much looking at the Bucks as this way to capture a championship. And it's obviously, you bring Oscar Robertson and Kareem Abdul Jabbar together, you hope for the best, and you think that there's such a special combination because on paper their games kind of overlap with one another. They can be interchangeable. They can be peanut butter and jelly in a lot of ways. And that's what that first season is. I should say first season together, that is the 1970-71 season, where going from 56-27, they go to 66-16 and win the NBA Finals. They sweep the Baltimore Bullets.
Only 18 seconds remaining in this final game of a hectic NBA season at Civic Center, with Milwaukee leading Baltimore 116-104. The Big O, 30 points, 11 of 15 from the field, 8 of 9 from the foul line, plus 9 assists. Well, he gets to enjoy the final 18 seconds on the bench. We have the reserves out for the Milwaukee Bucks. Lots of them. McLemore, he gets 2. So for Baltimore, it's Trezvant, George Johnson, Gary Zeller, Fred Carter, and Dory Murray. 5 seconds to go. Zeller on the rebound. 118-106, and the Milwaukee Bucks are the champions. 118-106, and let's go into the Milwaukee dressing room, and here is Jack Twyman.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. I'm in the Milwaukee Bucks. I'm so excited myself. These guys are going crazy in here. Wes Pavillon, the chairman of the board of the Milwaukee Bucks, Ray Patterson, the president. Congratulations to both of you.
Thank you, Jack. Thanks, Jack.
And Walter Kennedy, the commissioner of the NBA. Walter, it was a great championship.
Well, of course, Milwaukee has had a tremendous team all season, and I think it's only fitting under the circumstances that they should finish one of the greatest seasons any NBA team has ever had in winning the national NBA championship.
There's the Big O! Oscar, congratulations.
Yeah, thanks, Jack.
Big win for you. What do you feel? Is this better than the days that you see?
Oh, this is great. It's great, Jack. Finally got it.
This is 11 years in coming, right?
A long time, Jack.
How do you feel?
Oh, I feel wonderful, Great victory. Had a great team game.
What about this team, Oscar? Is this a great ball club?
I think we're coming, Jack. First year I'm with the club. I think we're going to lose. Has to get much better. Great guy. Big fella.
Hey, Luke.
Big fella.
Luke, congratulations. Oscar just paid you a great compliment. You had a great series. Congratulations. He was a big help. He was a big help.
Listen, Oscar played a hell of a game today.
How about yourself? You played a great game. Congratulations on the MVP.
Thank you very much.
How about the way Oscar put this ball club together? Don't you think that the addition of Robertson at the last year put a great ball club together?
Well, in this last game, we weren't all together today. We were missing some of our offensive plays. He just came right in, made the big play, got the rebound, put the ball in the hoop, made 3-point plays. He did everything.
Lou, you had a great series. Oscar, this ball club has just about everything, doesn't it?
Well, we hope to get there, Jack. We're still improving. We're a young club except for myself and Boozer, but we hope to be much better next season.
I believe at the time was the second sweep in finals history, but all throughout the year, the Bucks are this juggernaut, and it comes again in another wave of expansion in the NBA. I believe it was the Trailblazers in Portland, obviously, Cavaliers, and the Buffalo Braves come into the league. So kind of talent thins out in a lot of ways, but the Bucks themselves, they weather that storm. They lost a couple guys in expansion, but they grew together. They built, bringing in Oscar and putting him together with Kareem is one way to do it. But the chemistry that has been building for the two previous seasons with guys like Bob Dandridge and John McLaughlin, Greg Smith, on, they continue to fortify and build themselves into the machine that was that year. And, they set an 18-game winning streak. They set a record at the time for at least a couple months, it turns out, but a 20-game winning streak that year. They were truly unstoppable, and it kind of sets up the scene where, because of expansion, as I mentioned, the Bucks go to the Western Conference, which is very important because, the Knicks are always kind of hovering as the Bucks' rival, and it was very much thought that the Bucks are going to play the Knicks in the finals. It's been this culmination, and the Bullets, who had challenged the Knicks the year before, they pull out this kind of slugfest Game 7 victory, I believe in Madison Square Garden, and advance to the NBA Finals from the East. And the Bucks, it's kind of this letdown in a lot of ways, even from Bucks players like Oscar Robertson and Kareem. Everybody kind of circled the Knicks as the team that they wanted to face and wanted to beat because it had been building for such a long time. So.
Oh, the Knicks were at their apex, right? I mean, you had these legendary names like Clive Frazier and Bill Bradley, and it was just the Garden was Willis Reed. I mean, it was, and ultimately it did net out into a championship. But you can imagine how interesting and how, I mean, you think the Pacers Knicks are a thing now? My goodness, this must have been something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and not to denigrate those finals, but the Bucks kind of. Even going through those box scores and reading about those games, and even there of what few YouTube clips there are out there, there are some game footage of Game 4 specifically that I've watched over the years, and they're not even, it's not even at their apex of that season, but they're just so much better, and they know themselves at so much better than the Bullets did at the time. And granted, they had some injuries to some key players during that series, but it was just kind of this destiny, and they manifested it with winning that title. And it was, again, it gives the Bucks this extra meaning as a franchise to win a title that quickly, it being 3 years, and amid of, we like I mentioned before, it's like it's been a long time since the NBA has expanded, but for over a decade, there's a lot of teams that come into the league in short order, and a lot of times they're struggling to win. In the case of Buffalo Braves, they're struggling to even maintain their existence in their own city before moving. And it's the Bucks that kind of, literally buck this trend and reach this pinnacle of success so soon that it's so overwhelming for everybody involved that, as much as it, in the case of Wesley Pavlon, there's this great story that I didn't find until doing this research. So for over many years, this is all part of his plan. He always kind of viewed this as where year 3 was heading. And that sounds crazy to anybody else on the outside, even all these years later, not to me even. But it is just this crazy kind of vision board that they had from the get-go of how they were going to build this team step by step, and to manifest that and to realize that so in year 3 is just, it's still astounding. It's obviously a big linchpin to why I pursued this project in the first place.
Yeah, it's interesting though. You look back, you would think that it would be dynastic after all that. And look, they were still very, very competitive in the years following that championship. I mean, they racked up only 3 less wins in 71-72, lost in the conference finals in the West to the Lakers, I believe. 60 wins the next season, lost in the semis as well. And they made it to the finals again in 73-74, where they lost. But they finished first in each of their, I mean, you're talking about like 4 straight seasons of dominating their division and all that. Why do you think it didn't materialize into more championships? And what sort of, I know your book kind of circles around till about 1975 or so, kind of the end of the era kind of was sort of around then. Kareem obviously wanted to leave for a number of different reasons. Robertson retires. He's obviously getting older. It seems like they may have lost some of that magic. And here's the question: did they peak too soon? Right. It's hard to say when they were so dominant during the regular season and still being competitive, making the finals a couple of years later. But in retrospect, I'm sure it wasn't the case then. In retrospect, it seems like that peak could never have been repeated because it was just so illogical in the first place. I don't know.
No, I think it's a fair question. It's something I certainly increased, the more I kind of dove deeper into all this, and as I progressed through each season through the book too, you obviously wonder about these things because of, did it just happen all too fast? And they kind of made, they were still an excellent team, but they didn't back up their first title with another title as much as they came very close to doing that in 74. But I think a lot of things just kind of naturally happened. It's a team that got a lot older. They added some more veterans. They kind of lose that youthful experience. Success becomes the standard, so that comes with another layer of pressure that I think a lot of modern teams could relate. It changes a lot sooner than you imagine. And of course, when you're winning a lot of games, you don't have high draft picks. The biggest counter to this is that they make this move midway through the 1971-72 season. They trade this. I don't think it would be spoken about in the same way because of how things evolved, but it's this tough trade for Greg Smith. He gets traded to the Houston Rockets. He's kind of captures the spirit of the team in those early years. And I know through research and reading Kareem's book, he mentioned that he's one of the guys that one of his best friends on the team, if not the best friend on the team. He was someone that was very relatable and personable for him specifically. But the Bucks make this move to trade him to the Rockets, and they get a future draft pick in the 1972 draft. That draft pick is Julius Erving, who, as we know, didn't play for the Bucks, but at the time was a Virginia Squire. He goes to the ABA coming out of the University of Massachusetts. He goes to the ABA early too, similar to like Spencer Hayward. And it's very apparent that this, even with the ABA kind of, they don't have a national TV contract, but the legend of Dr. J is growing in the ABA. And the Bucks, through Wayne Embry, who becomes their general manager, he was the original captain of the team. He had seen and even, coached, if you want to call it that, like a skills camp, Dr. J. And he makes his pick. It's before the 1972-73 season, or at 1972 NBA draft before that season. And it is the biggest what if of this era because, we're talking about a Hall of Fame talent. We're talking about a generation defining talent, being on the same team with, an aging Oscar Robertson, but still Oscar Robertson, and Kareem Abdul Jabbar coming off of 2 MVP trophies. And as much as he was looking to jump to the NBA, he's practicing with the Atlanta Hawks in the lead up to the 72-73 season. And it's this big entanglement between the NBA, the ABA, the Bucks, the Hawks, the Virginia Squires. And it kind of sums up how the longer merger attempts were blocked by the players union, how messy pro basketball was getting in terms of guys are trying to jump leagues. It was getting blocked by lawsuits, going to Supreme Court or in various states of having to do rulings that way. So that's we know the story of Julius Erving. He eventually goes back to the Virginia Squires and then goes to the Nets and the ABA before jumping to the Sixers later that decade when he comes to the NBA. But that was kind of the biggest what if of that era. But you look at, they just didn't have enough guys that they lost. Dr. J is the biggest example, but I believe they had 3 straight first round picks that went to the ABA because of they didn't necessarily lowball them, but they got bigger offers from ABA teams at the time. And so there's just not that kind of, you're not generating the next talent. You're not cultivating a supporting cast that kind of to keep the machine rolling that eventually leads to they make the finals of 1974. They come agonizingly close. They lose on their home floor to the Celtics in Game 7. And it's kind of it's absolutely this crossroads summer of Oscar Robertson was going into that summer, fully knowing that he was going to retire. But the door is still kind of open. The Bucks have to make these provisions to protect him if ahead of the expansion draft. And they do that, but they're not willing to kind of renegotiate his contract after it elapses. So then he becomes this free agent. And he had eyed this move to join the NBA on CBS, the flagship basketball show at the time, and the provider of basketball or NBA games at the time, and to become their color analyst. And that was just another okay, we don't have anybody to replace Oscar. Months later, to now that we know, but at the time no one knew this, of this meeting between Kareem, Wayne Embry, Wesley Pavlon, who's kind of backed out of, he lingers over the operation, but he's not on day-to-day fingerprints, I would say. And Kareem's team, kind of advisors of this seminal meeting where he explains that he wants to leave Milwaukee and he wants to leave the Bucks. If you can negotiate a trade, I'm willing to work out anyway. I'll keep it under wraps, but this is going to be my last season playing for the Bucks going into the 1974-75 season. And quite honestly, the reason why I wanted to go further with this book than a lot of other kind of things that have been written about the time was that I knew the end point was this. I knew it was going to be the best way to kind of sum up everything was, Kareem's time in Milwaukee has this definitive end point. And it's for as much as I knew that the Bucks had won a title with him coming to Milwaukee and being drafted by the Bucks, it's his departure spoke volumes as I grew up watching the Bucks and the significance of he's remembered as a Laker, far more than he is remembered as a Buck, in part because of his discomfort living in the city. And it was never about he didn't want to be traded by the Bucks. It was about living in Milwaukee. It was a bigger story than just playing basketball with the Bucks. And I think that was what I kept coming to of all these things that I wrote about. It was very interesting to kind of look at the civic pride that Marvin Fishman and Wesley Pavlon are trying to bring to the city. And this whole project is built around Kareem. And he just was never felt at home from pretty much the start. And it was really eye-opening and illuminating in a lot of ways that and hopefully if it comes across reading the book that there was a bigger message kind of being applied here, and in a lot of ways it resonates to how I think a lot of Milwaukee sports fans will view their teams, or view the players that are playing on it. Obviously, having someone as good as Giannis Antetokounmpo, and kind of the current uncertainty around his future in Milwaukee resonates in a lot of ways, but that's very much a competitive thing. Not to interject modern Bucks talk into it, but it's about the outlook of the franchise and their ability to compete for a title. Now, with Kareem's case, it's a lifestyle thing, and not being at home in the city that he never really knew much of before he came here, and I don't know. Throughout this whole project, I kept searching for it. I think I tried to explain it as best I could in the book, but it was kind of this guiding light throughout this project of, I really wanted to dive deeper into Kareem's story, into Kareem's journey in Milwaukee, because that ties into a lot of things that speak bigger than basketball, speak bigger than the Bucks, frankly, and speaks of kind of this, maybe not skepticism, but just the kind of inferiority complex that exists rooting for a Milwaukee franchise, and whether it's keeping this franchise player happy throughout their career, or keeping the franchise itself happy and making sure it ensures their stay in the city, for the rest of the time. It always kind of lingers under the surface. So it's very interesting that as I was doing this project, and as I was going further and further, reading books, going through all these old newspaper clippings and stuff, that it always just kind of lingered in the background of Kareem's future in Milwaukee in a lot of ways, that just kind of brought it all home for me, and why I felt that like this is worthwhile to talk about and write about.
No, I think it's important, frankly, to understand. I mean, this is a franchise that's been around for, I think I said 59 years earlier. It's actually 57 seasons, right? And look, how to shine a spotlight on these early years, I think is really important, because not only does it tell the Lew Alcindor, Kareem Abdul Jabbar importance story, but it also it comes at a time when Milwaukee was trying to redirect its community efforts towards becoming once again a major league city, having tasted a bit of that in a couple of earlier settings. So there's that part of the story as well. And I think it's really interesting to recognize that this is a team that has been stable, well supported, and quite, by comparison to a lot of other franchises, relatively successful. I mean, of its 57 seasons, by my count, thank you, Pro Basketball Reference, I think only 19 seasons did they not make the playoffs, right? So that's a pretty good track record, albeit only having won, quote unquote, 2 championships, right? But the ones we talked about with Alcindor / Kareem Abdul Jabbar and Oscar Robertson back in the day, and some of these early in the third season, and obviously Giannis a handful of years ago, right? I mean, people also forget too that he's been with Giannis has been with the Bucks for 9 seasons, right? So he'd love to kind of taste at least one more championship before his expiration date, and he's got a couple of more years in the tank for sure. But I think it speaks volumes to what this franchise has become, maybe against the odds, right? Because it's still a relatively smaller market relative to some of these other markets in the NBA, maybe save for Oklahoma City. But look at Oklahoma City; they're very successful now. Milwaukee is a very solid franchise, has been for half a century already. And the fact that those early years could have made or broken that team either way. Without these early years and that success, quick as it might have been achieved, and maybe with a little luck, it could have been a different story, what we're talking about now.
Absolutely. I think there's no question. I think, again, as I kept writing this book, and one of the biggest things that, kind of, bucket list item that I was able to cross off doing this project, I talked to Jim Paschke, and he was, it served as the introduction of the book, but he did play-by-play for Bucks games for 35 years. His last year was actually coincidentally the 2021 title year, so a good way to go out in a lot of ways. But I was talking to him, and it's this big moment. It's the voice of the Bucks in a lot of ways for me, and I'm asking these questions of like seeing the bigger picture of like the fact that, as you mentioned, like the Bucks are still around. They've existed for more than half a century, and sometimes that was in doubt for based on building a new arena and kind of the usual trappings that happen with kind of ensuring a franchise's legacy in the place that it was thought of at the time. But it was so interesting to hear his perspective of someone that you travel on the road, you had literally a front row seat to a lot of Bucks games, and those early years and that success were so imperative to the history of the Bucks, and in a lot of ways, I think because they have achieved, they won the title a couple years ago. The freshness of that, and it's still new in a lot of ways, even though they've had their struggles in recent years. But I think that has overshadowed just how massive it was to win the first title. Not to rank it compared to one or the other, but because of the circumstances, because of the odds placed against building the team, thinking of the team, getting the team into the league, getting Kareem to town, having him being this kind of beacon of light that eventually forces Oscar Robertson to come to the city, building a championship team, winning the championship, maintaining that over years. And, going back to the Kareem of it all, he's so at the heart of everything. And he lingers so much even to this day that, I think a lot of things that, it's a lot of years have gone by, and he's embraced, being a Buck, even though, again, I think by and large, a lot of people just associate him with the Lakers, even the Bruins, really, kind of a basketball figure of Los Angeles rather than Milwaukee. But the whole reason why the Bucks still kind of exist lies in what he did and what he did to legitimize the team. He may not have felt at home here, and that's that more power to him. Like that is it can be the case for a lot of people, whether that's in Milwaukee, whether that's in Cincinnati. But someone like him coming to town and winning a championship just kind of established Milwaukee in a way that made the city not only a good basketball town, but it resonated in how the NBA eventually evolved. And, it obviously wasn't a clean rise in their own way as the ABA was kind of challenging them still into the 70s. But Milwaukee is viewed as this market that supports good basketball. They have won title. There's championship success as a standard. And in a lot of ways, I think that we don't view it in this way, especially in basketball and kind of the modern attention span of how the NBA may be presented, which is I won't go on that diatribe, but we kind of lose sight of someone like him who his time was finite. He only played 6 seasons in Milwaukee, but what he did here helped ensure that the Bucks are still a franchise today. And, again, to go back to it being the heart of the story, it was kind of the driving light to this whole process and why I just felt so compelled to it. Because, Oscar Robertson was the man of Cincinnati. He was Mr. Cincinnati Royal. Once he left, the Cincinnati Royals moved to Kansas City 2 seasons later. He's kind of, you see the road that the Bucks could have gone down if, they didn't prepare and kind of gracefully acquiesce to Kareem's wishes to be traded and to prepare for life after Kareem, because in a lot of ways that some NBA franchises weren't afforded that, and I think the Bucks definitely recognized that once they eventually trade him to the Lakers.
All right, there you have it. Our thanks to Jordan. You must get the book to get much deeper into the areas of this early number of years of this franchise known as the Milwaukee Bucks. It is called Building the Milwaukee Bucks. Kareem Abdul Jabbar, Oscar Robertson, and the rapid rise of an NBA franchise. It is published by our friends at McFarland, and it is available literally now wherever you find good books, of course. If you'd like to go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, just search up this episode number 402 with me and Jordan, and you'll find right there for you a convenient link or two or three to the paperback and or Kindle versions, courtesy of Amazon. We'll get some referral love there from our friends there for buying it that way. And we appreciate if you do it that way. But of course, if you want to support your local bookseller instead and just go down the street and buy a copy that way, do what you need to do. Just get yourself a copy of the book. And we all thank you in the aggregate. While you're online, why don't you also check out Jordan's writings at you can find them on the Substack thing. You can go to GSPN. That stands for, it's a letter G as in Giannis. There you go. gspn.substack.com. You can also follow Jordan on various socials such as Blue Sky. You'll find him at Jordan, Jordan Treske, Treske, jordan.treske.bsky.social on Blue Sky. And on X, you'll find him at Jordan Treske, all one word. While you're doing the socials, why don't you follow us, for goodness sakes? We're also mostly active in Blue Sky and X form. On Blue Sky, you'll find us at goodseatsstillavailable.com. On X, you'll find us at goodseatsstill. And just about everywhere else, you will find us at Good Seats Still Available, all one word, including YouTube, by the way, where we stream every episode of this show. But of course, you know by now the best way to ensure that you don't miss a thing on our feed is to make sure that you subscribe or follow us in your favorite podcast app. So make sure you do that. And if your friends haven't done that, get on them to do that too. And while you're on there, how about a 5-star rating and a nice review and an attaboy? We'd appreciate that too. Helps others find the show via the algorithms involved. Let's see. What else? Our email address is hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. That website, again, goodseatsstillavailable.com, is a place where you can also buy cool merch from some of our great sponsors, such as oldschoolshirts.com and 503 Sports for a jersey or two that you might like to get and have your name put on the back of, etc. And, of course, our thanks, as always, to Atlanta, Georgia's own Jerry Payne for his audio excellence this week. Thank you, kind sir. Thank you all for listening. And I love doing research for these episodes. And I stumbled across a little ditty, literally a ditty at the last minute here. And I'm going to share it with you because it's who knew this existed? Now, if you grew up in the Milwaukee area as a Bucks fan, watching on the TV those road games in the late 70s, well, you probably did know the existence of this, but I didn't. It is called Green and Growing, The Bucks Don't Stop Here, by a little group called the Green Music Machine. So we're going to leave you with that tune. It's pretty good. And we'll see you until next week. Please enjoy.